speaking with?
Hi, I'm Robert Bigelow, and I am currently 68 years old. Grew up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Have had a 35-year career as a website designer and software developer, and um, currently am living in Delray Beach, Florida, but I love to travel.
Okay, and we're here today because of your spiritual experiences. How many would you say you've had throughout your lifetime?
Well, I count them as different levels of experiences. I would say that the in East India, they have what's called 4 levels of samadhi experiences, and I would say a samadhi experience or greater, I've had at least 8 of those throughout my lifetime, and I call them near-death-like experiences because um, they resemble moving into another dimension without um, completely leaving the physical awareness behind. So there's like a blending of dimensions, and then there are some to where I have actually disappeared and can no longer retain the memory of where I went.
Okay, so uh, emotional experiences and then non-physical experiences, and then there's matters of the heart.
Yeah, so I'd say the samadhi oriented experiences are, while emotions are present, it's a non emotional event. It's an event where um, it's an event that happens to me, and it's not like what we would think. Oh, I've just had this wonderful emotional experience. It's not that. It's like a dimension opens up. There's an entirely different existence and reality, of which I'm calling the spiritual realm or non-physical
And how do you
realm.
think that relates to what we call God? Is there another
Uh,
way to say that? Like
yeah.
the
So
God, the source?
yeah. So from the human perspective, we have to language things to ourselves in order for our brains to work properly. So we want to be able to speak to ourselves in ways that we understand. And so anything we don't understand, we will attempt to name, but there is no complete understanding of God or the divine or the source from the human mind, from the human construct.
I think that's a great statement, is that we don't, as an entire species, we don't actually know what we call God is. Is this a being that lives in another dimension? Does he live in us and we're an extension of that? Is this something you have to go to the source? I think it's a great statement to say we don't currently know, and I'm interviewing you today to figure out some of the answers to some of those questions,
Right.
but you're not the person that can say emphatically this is how it is, because I think the mind can't even conceive of the truth of what it is. And I think religion puts it in a good box for the human mind. But today we're going to talk about things beyond human religion.
Okay.
So, where you where were you from? Where were you born?
I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Had a wonderful childhood, had great parents, very loving parents. We had enough money to where we lived on the water and we would go over to the islands. And both my parents were very loving. They were attentive to us and they developed.
So you have.
Yeah, three brothers. So there's 4 boys altogether, and we gave our mom a real good time.
I'm your son, but I'm pretending like I don't know.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm the interviewer.
Right.
So.
Right.
Okay. Tell me just 2 loves or passions when you were young. Like what motivated you? What inspires you? What was a desire or a passion? Something that you lived for? Was it school, academics?
One thing embedded within my humanity, and I have in my mind, when we talk about me, I have a different point of relationship. When I talk about myself, there's my human self, and then my soul self, or my spiritual self, and they're not, while integrated, they're almost like 2 different beings. So within my human self, as a child, I had a very, very strong desire to explore and to not just geographically, but I wanted to explore activities also. So I went through a plethora of activities when I was young, and engaged in them with all my heart, but I also spent hours and hours and hours on my own, just alone, and I used to travel alone by myself as a 10-year-old, and I went down every nook and cranny in my neighborhood and beyond my neighborhood as far as I could go, just to see what was there.
So you sound like an explorer. You don't sound like you had your nose in the books, or you were really focused on the friends and other kids in the neighborhood. You don't seem materialistically focused.
Right.
So what did you think was behind each corner? Like what was...
So I don't know. I think part of my human nature is embedded within it the idea of just exploring. So when I had my first experience when I was 11, my first spiritual experience, actually my second one, when I was 11, my exploration turned inward and not just outward, but so both of those were evolving at the same time in my life through the decades. But being caught up in that white light when I was 11 greatly impacted me, and I didn't realize it at that time, or really up until really recently, that there was a message put on my heart that has taken really an entire lifetime of experiences to finally get to the point where I'm able to take that message and give it to the world.
So it sounds like you think that there's something in you besides your mind.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Why don't you elaborate on maybe that first experience of the white light? What is that? What are you talking about?
So 11 years old, going to St. Anthony's Catholic School in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I snuck out of recess, which was not that uncommon for me to do. And I would go through the New River Tunnel along Federal Highway and go to the 7-Eleven, and I would steal some candy, and then I would go back and sneak into school before recess was over.
To a crime.
I
right?
did. I admitted to a crime. So come and take me away.
So you're human.
Yeah, I'm very human, and as my story unfolds, you'll see that not only have I experienced the heights of white light, undescribable love, I've also experienced the depths of darkness.
Okay, we're probably going to want to touch on that depths of darkness a little bit later, but I want to ask you, what's the earliest experience non-emotional, and also just non-physical
Right.
experience can you think of happening to you? What was your
Right. So to clarify, when I call spiritual experiences, I don't mean sitting under a tree and the wind blows and my skin, you know,
Yeah, well, let's
gets
actually touch on that really quick. What do you mean by spiritual?
non-physical dimension.
And that's it. We're
You're right.
not even going into religious yet.
No, we're not going into religion. We're not going into conceptualizing. We're not going into imagination. We're not going into LSD trips, which I admit I'm an old hippie from way back and I have had a few. But none of that. We're not going into, I'm not talking about deep meditation, which I've spent probably thousands of hours in my lifetime. I'm talking about the human veil being lifted and I can see beyond myself.
What's the human veil? What do you mean by that? You can make reference to the Bible. Jesus talks about the veil, the block of the mind, being able to actually see, conceptualize such divinities,
Yeah.
however you want to call it.
So I would not really know that it existed had I not been pulled out of it.
So this is a much later experience that was kind of supernatural. Something happened later in 1994, but we're gonna focus right now on your very first introduction to spirituality, just a non-physical experience, like someone.
Okay, so let me see if I can try to quickly clarify this. And I got to tell you that without experiencing it, it is next to impossible to really grasp what I'm saying. It's not because we're stupid
Yeah.
or non-intelligent. It's like trying to explain what it's like in Bali if you've never been to Bali, or what it's like on the moon if you've never been to the moon. So you can extrapolate, you can imagine, but until you actually go to the moon, do you really know what it means? So,
well, in your opinion, in your stating here today, you've been to the moon and you've been to Bali. That's why we're doing this interview. We're trying to pull out as much as we can for the audience to understand these things that you've been through, what the message was, how did it feel, if there was anything you physically saw, and what was the takeaway?
okay, so going back to the veil, the human veil is non-describable in human language, but that's all we have to do to communicate. It is the filter that is placed upon the human consciousness at some point around birth, maybe after birth, sometime in the beginning of our physical life. It's what allows us to have a filtered, limited version of reality. So what it does is it filters the higher vibrational frequencies of light extending out from the divine, and it filters those to where it almost densifies, or we experience the lower vibrations, because the divine light has all the vibrations. White light is all the colors of the rainbow. But we only, as humans, get to experience part of that as a normal, everyday operating system for our brains and our minds and our human consciousness. This gives us the illusion that we are separate from the divine, that the divine and our soul are separate entities. It's not reality, but it is a version of reality.
So, like, we're born and boom, the gate comes shut. If there is a God, if we are the extension of Him, it's like amnesia. It comes shut, and now we are just free to simply experience the world as a human without maybe even the awareness of spirit.
Yeah, so I think as we're babies and we don't know language, we know only the experience of the energy flowing through us. I think when you look into a baby's face and they smile, there's some representation of this incredible peace and happiness uh, until they have to go to the bathroom or are hungry, that reflects the lack of filtering. But as we've been given five senses, you know, the taste and touch and such, those become the senses that we begin to rely on as our reality. So the older we get, the more physical we become in our mentality and in our thought processes, until at a very early age, even before 6, way before 6, 2 years old maybe, we are physical creatures from our perspective.
The human condition has come down on us. We are
Right.
stuck and in the human condition. As we get older, it solidifies and it really makes us feel like that is all that there is.
Right. And so with that as a encroaching reality, that we look out into the world and we say our parents and our brothers and sisters have the same reality, then it's basically it's verified to us that that is not only acceptable but a truthful way of perceiving ourselves, because the other senses, the senses of our soul, the connection to our soul, is diminishing at a very early age, couple years old. The soul's not diminishing, but our connection to it is diminishing. So the physical reality takes place. So I want to say this though, wonderfully crafted,
Yeah,
perfectly designed.
right,
Without it, we could not have the human experience.
right.
We would not have Netflix, or Netflix would be nothing but wonderful people doing wonderful things all the time.
Instead of just human drama after human drama after human drama.
There would be no emotional pain. There would be physical pain, because that's a physical reality, but there would be no emotional pain. When the soul, the energy of the soul, the energy of the divine, is incapable of housing physical pain. It's only when you reach a distance away from those energies and that presence that we're able to experience emotional pain. Somebody says something to us, and then for some reason it hurts. And
right, why does it hurt? You know?
right, it's because it's the visceral experience of the absence of love.
That's it, yeah.
Right. So that is why humanity hurts. Is when we are far enough away from the energy of the soul, we hurt inside because of the visceral absence of the love, the unconditional divine love that emanates from our soul. And we can't feel it behind the veil, behind the human veil.
And when you say divine, you're meaning what in religion, Christian religion, is calling God.
So yeah, so
Same
you know,
thing, or
well, you know, the coexist, you know, those little bumper stickers that.
yeah.
So every religion, every spiritual path, every religion attempts to put a name on that entity, which is really nameless in its own form, um, we have to call it something. So language is an agreed upon communication. So if you and I, let's say we're both Muslims, we'll sit here and we'll call it Allah. If we're Buddhist, we'll call it Buddhist. If we're Christian, we'll call it God or Jesus. Or so we agree upon a language, but it's just
Right.
the name. It is not the presence of. So belief in the name does not equate to an experience of.
Okay.
And that leads, which we're not going to get into yet, I guess, that leads to the message that is inside me, and that is the experience of, not the belief in.
Okay. Let's dive into the experience. So, as I can understand it, one of your first experiences was at 6.
Yeah, my first memory of an experience that goes beyond the human confines was I would sit in a chair and I would put on this record album that my parents had of this female singer, and on the back of the record album was her picture. Her picture just entranced me. It was dark featured. She was like really melancholy looking, and I would sit and I'd come home for a period of time. I came home. I think my parents hid the record on me because I would come home and I would sit and play that record over and over for hours, and I would look at her picture and I would completely go into another space and time. And that other space and time wasn't detailed, but it was the presence of this incredible love between a man and a woman. And I would just sit there for hours immersed in this love, and then the pain of loss of that love. So there was not only the experience of the love, there was this intense, painful loss of that love that at 6 years old, I had no way of understanding it or languaging it, so I never spoke to anybody about it.
So, do you believe that as a soul, not as a human being, but as a soul, we may have potentially have had past lives? That this
Yeah, so the idea of reincarnation is an interesting one. And here again, the difference between belief and experience. Belief is something that we hold because we haven't experienced it. Experience is just experience. So I can tell you what my experience is. I don't have a belief system about it. So I can't say that I believe it or don't believe it. I can just tell you what my experiences are. And I've written about these. They're on the website and in books. But in a nutshell, that experience with that woman played out in my life, all through my life into the year 2011.
like it's been a thread.
Yeah, it was a thread all through my life, and it's
So where possibly could that have come from, but not something that somehow predates birth? I mean, if you were 6, 7 years old with feeling this energy that you've lost a romantic interest somewhere, but you haven't lived yet, you're only 6, 7, it could only be, first of all, potentially fabricated by the mind,
right.
or what we believe is as an eternal extension of God and the divine, that it's a previous life, karma, something that happened.
Yeah. So once again, I regarding this, I'm not sure why. I don't want to create belief systems. I just want to talk about what I've experienced, and so from when I was 6 up until 2011, there were too many detailed intermittent experiences, and a couple were, with that I don't even count as my spiritual experiences, but they were interdimensional, meaning they were not just in this physical present day realm. They spanned time and space, and finding myself in another time and space without any provocation from anything external in my life. And so I came to, well, basically my whole life I looked for her, and I found her in 2011 in Pasadena, California. And then it was settled. That whole energy of looking for her and something being unresolved in my life, which I like the Eastern philosophy of karma, that it's an energy that has to be neutralized, otherwise it just continues. And so once I met her in 2011 in Pasadena, it was all neutralized and it went away.
So what was the dramatic thing that you have an intuition about that happened to her in that previous life?
Okay, so I was invited to a group of 7 or 8 people. Somebody was going to do some form of spiritual thing. I don't remember.
Like a channeling?
No, it was more like a meditative type of thing. And so we all got into a meditative state, and then she said, does anybody have anything coming up for them or anything to say? And right then I was just taken over, and I could see my human consciousness, you know, the thing that sits here that I always think that is me, moved into the back, and another consciousness kind of came down from above and resided in its place. This
maybe
other
maybe that's your spirit?
Yeah, so I don't think it was a foreign entity or anything like that, and definitely not alien, because I was wearing my, tinfoil cap at the time. So I began, my eyes were closed, and all of a sudden I saw the room. Reminds me of the Matrix, how he began to see, with his eyes were burnt, he began to see the energy of people. So I started seeing the energy of people, and this has happened to me before, so it wasn't completely surprising to me. And so I went around to each person, and then the last person I went to was a man, and each person I would touch them on the leg, on their knee, and it's like I knew everything about them.
Oh, okay, I see.
And I would say something that spoke to their life. Now I've never done this before, but this is what came out. So the last person I went to was a man, kind of burly man with a beard, from Tennessee, I believe he was. And as soon as I touched his leg, it's like a crackle and a whole dimension opened up, and there I had my arms holding this man. I recognized him as the same man, but he was different. In my arms, he was bleeding out. We had the gray soldier uniforms of the Civil War, and he's bleeding out. He had been shot. I look over, there's this big, huge fallen tree that everybody was hiding behind and shooting, and he was looking up at me, and he looked up at me, and I recognized him then as my best friend. And he looked up at me, and he grabbed me, and he said, "Take care of Claire." And then he died. And so Claire was his wife. And then the scene moved from there. And I think it fast forwarded to years and years later. So Claire and I had fallen in love. And we had gotten married, and I was walking down this long road to our house, and had a beautiful old house, old now, but and all of a sudden I saw the smoke started coming from the house, and I ran towards it, and as I got closer, all of a sudden I could see Claire's face in the window with her hands up against the window, yelling, and flames just engulfed her.
Oh, so she potentially died in that fire.
Yeah, so yeah. So that was the last image, and then I was jarred out of that, and as I told him what had happened, he was telling the group, he said, you know, I still live with my mother, okay? He's like, I still live with my mother because she has this full basement that she's allowed me to take over, and I do Civil War reenactments down there. So he's got all these little toy soldiers, and he's created this one battle scene, and he replays that battle scene over and over and over since he was in high school.
Well, maybe that's why people do stuff like that, because was real.
Well, real in the sense of not what most people call real. Most people call real as the dense form of physical reality.
I mean a previous life.
Right. So when I told him this, he cried, and he sat back, and he said, "I'm done."
Oh, like the energy had been neutralized at that point?
Yeah, he said, I'm done. I don't need that, all that toy. I don't need all that anymore. So something in him was so I think our meeting each other, was neutralize the energy for him.
Well, that would have been really intense if that were true in a previous life. He dies in your arms, and then she dies in a fire. That makes a triangle between all three of you, and the energy that trauma needs to be neutralized between all three of you. So it's interesting when you tell me after that happened, he said he no longer wanted to play and reenact, so sounds like a neutralization there.
Yeah, and everything I can gain from, I've studied all the major religions and practiced a number of them, but something I gained from the Vedic and the Eastern philosophies that hold reincarnation is that the energies, unresolved energies, move into the next lifetime to be resolved. And it's like a system of one experience after another, one lifetime experience, all these, going through all this plethora of humans and experiences possible. And so
maybe that's what we do as a spirit, is we collect those experiences.
Yeah, so I think the awareness of it leads us towards the neutralization of the energy. As we become aware, because before then we're just reacting to that energy system in us, and we're doing things, we have no idea why we're doing them. Like I had no idea why I chose the same type of looking woman all the way up into my marriage, and never was attracted to any other woman other than the dark-haired, melancholy woman that resembled the back of the...
resembled Claire in that
right.
in that life.
Right. and the one that I drew thousands and thousands of times in charcoal. I could only draw her face in charcoal.
I remember some of those drawings.
Yeah.
And then you painted a picture, but that was...
So after my marriage and my divorce, a whole new image came into my mind of Claire. And it was no longer the melancholy person. It was the peaceful, happy, loving blonde. Like, you know, night and day. And that's the picture I painted in Ramblewood.
Yeah. So now you're picturing a different woman, and then turns out in 2011 you find her on OkCupid or something.
Yes.
And turns out that that's her. That's Claire. That she's a real woman in this life.
Her profile was the inverted picture of my painting.
And it's really bizarre, and it is on the website. You can see that you painted that, and then years later found, and it's not just like, oh, that woman looks like the painting. It was what you believe.
Right. Well, you were the one, when I showed you her picture, I said, see how beautiful she is? She's so pretty. And you looked at her and you said, Dad, that looks like your painting.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, what do you mean? You know, the one you did years ago, it was 14 years ago since I had done that painting. So 14 years had passed. In 1997 is when I did the painting.
Okay.
And I saw, and now we're talking about 2011. So 14 years had passed, and then I pulled up a picture of the painting, and I put them side by side, and it was just ominous. It was her. And so the next 10 days, there were incredible influx of spiritual experiences or spiritual revelations, epiphanies, meditative type epiphanies that reinforced that was Claire, but that the thing that hurt is that we would never be allowed to be together in this time and space, that we were not for each other now.
Right.
But that we needed to meet so that the energy would be neutralized.
Yeah, I remember after you had that phone conversation with her, you were coming to a point of it being neutralized, like you no longer...
Yeah, and I remember after the 10 days, and it was really emotional, and it really hurt the way it evolved. And I mean, if she ever sees this video, I am so sorry from the bottom of my heart, the way it came out and the way it evolved. And I was never able to tell you the story behind it all. And so
I see.
She never really understood. So maybe one day she'll see this and she'll understand. But after that, after I got over that, I remember walking into Starbucks and noticing, and we're still in Pasadena, I walked in, and all of a sudden I noticed I was no longer searching the eyes of women to see if I recognized the spirit of Claire.
And you probably just wanted to know that she was okay.
Yeah, that's what...
That's the biggest thing. It's not about, let me take you, marry you, and take you through eternity with me.
Right.
We just need to meet. And
yeah,
and then the energy was like neutralized after that, and then we felt that we were done with Pasadena.
Yeah, and then we left and we moved to Ojai.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, I no longer felt the need to have a woman complete me. See, I felt incomplete as long as that energy existed. inside me, and once it was neutralized, then was complete in and of myself.
So, okay, awesome. Like, regardless of whether Lily was actually Claire in the fire in that previous life, it did you tremendous benefit, at least thinking that.
Well, let's say so. I've gotten beyond the idea that that was a fabrication in my head, because I'm rational enough to know that I could never have scripted that meeting with that guy, and I could not have scripted meeting Claire. But another possibility, I mean, Lily. Well, Claire in the reincarnation form of Lily.
Yeah.
But one other possibility is that possible. This is why I'm not conclusive about reincarnation. That it's possible that the lives of those two people somehow energetically remained on the earth, in the ether somehow, and then somehow was attached to me. So my memories of it appear to be as if it was my life, but it actually wasn't. So it doesn't matter whether it was my life or whether it was the lives of somebody else's attached to me, that I feel as if it is my life is irrelevant, because the effects on me were both the same. The effect on me was as if it was my life in the Civil War and with Claire. So whether that actually, and I speak from this place of, there's emphatic knowledge that is given to me from divine, the soul, from
Right.
that realm, and then there's conjecture that I attempt, the mind always wants to try to connect the dots, so I fill in the spaces in between and come to a conclusion, and that's what I call belief. I don't really know, but I come to a conclusion, and then I embrace it as if it is factual knowledge, but I don't like doing that anymore. So to me, it's still in the realm, whether it's reincarnation or me tapping into energies that existed within other people. It's irrelevant, because it's still jerked my life around the same.
Well, okay, yeah, and regardless of anything, it did you much good having that experience.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and move forward from that into the next experience.
Okay.
This is more specific about the divine, the source, and the soul with the white light experience at 11. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I think I was starting to talk about that, but walking through the tunnel on my way back.
What tunnel?
New River Tunnel in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So I was ditching school and going over to. All right. So at this point, do you want to all right, we'll just let it continue to run.
Unless you need a break.
No, what happened? We got sidetracked. I was starting to go into that.
Well,
and we
wanted to
talked
close the experience of Lily, Claire.
Okay.
Rather than jumping back. So.
Okay, great. We'll edit all this out.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm in St. Anthony's Catholic School. I'm 11 years old. It's recess, and as I've done a few times in the past, I would slip through the hole in the gate and run over to the 7-Eleven, going through the New River Tunnel in Fort Lauderdale off of US 1. I would steal a candy bar, and then I'd go back through the tunnel and go back before recess was over. This time on my way back, I was taken up into a white light. It felt as if talk
about what you experienced in that moment? Did something appear? Were you stopped inside?
So
What
in,
happened
in
in
that
that time?
moment, it just felt like my spirit was raised up out of my body or my consciousness. You know, like you hear about near-death experiences, like they're on the operating table and then their body rises up and they look back down and see themselves.
Yeah.
That's what I felt like. But instead of looking back down, seeing myself, I just kept going up.
Oh.
And I lost all semblance of physical reality, and I entered into this incredible white light that was filled with unconditional love, the eternity of existence, no death, no pain, no tears. I had gone home. That's what I felt like.
That's good. Yeah.
So when I came to, when I came back into my physical consciousness, I was sitting in the classroom with my hands folded on the desk, sitting up straight. Gotta remember this, like sitting up straight. And then I looked at the nun, and she was talking, and she looked over at me, and it's like she gasped and fell back in her chair.
Really?
Yeah. And so then she just paused and she got back up, and then right then the bell rang.
You mean like you just appeared at your desk? Or...
No, I don't think I just appeared at my desk, but what I think is, when I say fell back in her chair, it wasn't like she was scared. It was like she had seen. Yeah, try to put this in terms of Catholicism. That she had seen the Holy Ghost.
Right, right.
Or she had seen the Spirit of Jesus, or the Spirit, or something.
She'd like seen the Holy Spirit on you.
So what I think she saw was what I've been shown is the true, what the human soul looks like. And it's just this egg-shaped, light fibers emanating out, encircling the human body. I think that's what she probably saw for a brief moment. And she looked very happy. She looked like Sister Margarita Maria. Who,
oh, you remember her?
Yeah, yeah. And I just saw her again on our 50th, at our 50th anniversary for 8th grade.
Really?
Something. Yeah. I went to it, and actually I can't remember if she was there. I think she might have just recently passed away. But so anyway, Sister Margarita Maria. But anyways, that's when I gave the candy bar to the girl next to me.
You were taken up and you were in a white light. What did you see at that point? Did you see any?
And so all I saw, man has only the 5 senses to go by, but in that realm there are other senses.
Right.
So what I saw was white light. There was nothing but white.
Was there a voice? There was something told to you?
It was a presence. It was an eternal presence of.
So nothing said?
So I was never told who that presence was by the presence. Like, the presence didn't say,
so you just simply
I am God.
It.
Yeah. There was no explanation necessary, and there was no questions asked. Mm-hmm. This was, everything was just so clear. This is existence.
I guess if you really do transcend up into the divine, nothing really needs to be said anyway.
Right.
Because that energy, that realm is so emphatic of what it is, what you're experiencing, and I've experienced something similar.
Right.
Okay, so and then you're at your desk, and that's basically just the end of that experience?
Well, no, not quite. That was for that day. But then at some point later, I don't know, a few days, a week, 2 weeks maybe, we used to play baseball in the church parking lot at St. Sebastian Church, right down the street from my house. And I'm out there, and I think I'm in center field, and a high fly ball is hit, and all of a sudden I heard a voice saying, "Come to me." And I looked over at the church, and I remember the ball fell, and everybody's yelling at me, and I dropped my glove, and I just went over to the church. And I walked in the church, there's nobody there. I walked in like I was being guided into the second pew on the right-hand side of the church, and I sat there, and then all of a sudden something came over me, and I sat up straight, and I was frozen. I could only look straight ahead, and off to my right there was an alcove where they, you know how the Catholics have these places where you light the candles, and it's really great ornaments and decorated nicely and everything. And so all of a sudden this energy system appeared in that direction. I thought back then, he was in the alcove, but now I understand there's no spatial aspect about the other dimension. It just appears, and it's superimposed on top of the physical reality. So what it looked like was a mirage. It looked like an egg-shaped mirage that I couldn't see through, but from the other side of that mirage was that same being, that the white light. And so I would sit there straight ahead for, I had no idea how long. It could have been a minute, it could have been 2 hours. But there was this flow of energetic exchange without words, without thought, of each other's presence. It was just this wonderful flow of what humans call love, but it's just the energy of the source. It's the energy of the divine, and it is completely fulfilling. And so that lasted for months. Every few days, every week or two, I would feel called, and then I would go down there, and then the same thing would happen. And so I thought that this is, being Catholic at the time, I thought that, so this is how God calls priests.
Right.
Because I heard them talking about being called. I thought they actually meant, this.
Oh, okay. So you thought like, this is my calling.
This is my calling. So I wanted to be a priest. So I said, so this is what God wants me to do. He wants me to be a priest. So I was already an altar boy, but then I started. So at the time, Father Rocco, this goes into when the bubble burst and the shadow appeared. My first experience of the human veil, which I don't know if you want to get into it at this moment, but why don't we'll go over that at another time. But so this is what happened for months, and then there was an event that took place, and the bubble burst, and I became human. And you know what I did after the bubble burst? I was in the church, an event happened, and it was with a Catholic priest, but not what most people would first extrapolate, was that I went out. As I'm leaving the church, I'm angry, I'm distraught, because the presence of the divine has left, and I felt normal again, just like a little boy.
I remember you saying it was like a dark shadow had entered you.
Yeah, you know what? I should probably say it. Otherwise, people aren't going to understand. So, Father Rocco, he had his proclivities for wine, and he used to love me to serve him wine. So after the Mass, He had this, the Catholics in those days sat in these big red, crimson red velvet and gold chairs, and so he would sit there and he would get drunk, and he would yell out, "More wine, Bobby, more wine, Bobby, more wine, Bobby," and I'd be cleaning up and doing all the little chores, and so at one point I bent down and I heard him yell out, "More wine, Bobby," and I looked at him from the side, and I remember him like taking his last gulp and coming back and like being, not steady, being drunk. And by the way, I had absolutely no critical thought in my mind about his condition. Matter of fact, I saw his spirit, and that's pretty much the predominant thing that I saw. I saw inside, I saw his soul, his spirit. The outer was completely irrelevant. But as I did that, all of a sudden I looked over my left shoulder, and way out of the corner, this black shadow came towards me, and it just came towards me, and it went inside me, and it like blended with me, and all of a sudden I looked back at Father Rocco, and he was this overweight Italian man with a huge bulbous nose. And I never saw that. Until now. Yeah. I never saw his face like that. And I looked and I could see myself in the mirror, and I looked different. There was no glow, there was no this energy was missing, and I hated myself. I think I even yelled out, "I hate you. This isn't real." So that's not real. This isn't real. The religion isn't real. All this is just some form of stage play, and now I realize that I'm an actor on it. And I cried and was angry, and as I'm leaving, I took the 2 sticks that you burn candles with, and I dug the money out of the contribution box, and I stole the money, and I left. And not long after that, I started drinking. I started guzzling bottles of whiskey with my friends, and I wasn't doing it alone. We were all doing it. And anyway, so that was my first experience with the human veil. It wasn't evil. It wasn't Satan. It wasn't anything like that. It was the human condition was returning to me because it had been temporarily lifted. But I thought back then that it was more like the devil, because that's what I grew up in, that's what I thought. So, and then when I looked at myself, I thought I was just a horrible person now. Just being alive without the spirit in me, I felt like a horrible person compared to what I was. So, needless to say, self-esteem. My self-esteem was at rock bottom. Mm-hmm. So, that was the experience I had when I was 11.
Okay. What can you think of that happened after that, like to your next one?
So, by the time I graduated high school, I was addicted to drugs. I loved the hippie movement, and I loved the psychedelics, but I got addicted to opiate-oriented drugs, and I kicked those on my own when I graduated high school, and I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I found Transcendental Meditation. So I started meditating again, and my experience was, my very first experience, I could see this light way off in the distance. So I kept meditating, and that light would look like it would come closer and closer and closer, but it never came back like it did when I was 11. So when I was 23, and so this was 1978, I was very emotionally distraught, soul sick. I constantly thought about that white light and had no idea how to get there. So I was hitchhiking from Florida on my way out to Colorado, and I stopped at Lake Melbourne, and I sat there for 2 days, and I said to myself and to God, I said, I'm going to the Colorado mountains until I find you. I am not coming down until you show yourself to me again. So I already had something to go by, and I do understand people without any experience like that find it very, very difficult to think that type of thing could happen, because you sought it and you wanted it to happen. So I never made it to Colorado. Picked up by a guy, Gainesville, Florida. We started reading the Bible together. Came to a certain verse, and I had this incredible spiritual experience. And I said, this is it. I want to receive God's Spirit. How do I do that? And so, anyways, long story short, I was baptized, and when I went down, I felt that shadow leave me. I exhaled all my breath, and the pastor couldn't get me back up. He was slipping, and he couldn't get me back up. And then all of a sudden, this white light entered me, and I came back up out of the water, and there it was again. The white light, but it was different. It was like now it was in me. And I looked out in the crowd, and I saw everybody's spirit. I saw their human form surrounded by this, it was like a glowing, at that night it was like a glowing golden light. And so anyway, so that put me into the realm of, it was a Church of Christ, so it was modern, fundamental Christianity. But I started profusely studying the Bible. And most people that studied the Bible that I was around were interested in the doctrinal beliefs or the stories or everything. I was interested in what the Spirit was doing behind all the stories, how the Spirit was moving in the people. Those are the things I wanted to see and know. And so I read like Exodus 33, and Moses is, I guess, talking to God, and he says, show me your glory. And then a few verses later, it says, this I will do for you because I know you by name. And as soon as I read that, I heard this voice from the light that says, if you ask, I will. And it scared me, because I had been a drug addict, I had done things, I had become a Christian, I felt forgiven of things that I had done, but my self-worth was still really low, and I couldn't accept the idea that God would show himself to me. And so for 3 years, I toyed with it, but then once again, emotional pain brought me to seek, and so I started asking. So every day, all day long, I went out and I walked and I sat and I just said over and over and over the same words that Moses said, show me your glory, show me yourself, show yourself to me. I want to see you again. And it went on for day after day and 2 weeks, but I just couldn't stop. It was so intense in me. Now, and this is before you were born. I was now married, and so after 2 weeks, all of a sudden, I'm sitting at night in probably 30-degree weather at a graveyard in my car, crying and asking God to show himself to me. And then I felt this wind fill up the car. And just so people don't misunderstand, I really don't think a physical wind was in the car, but it was like a wind, and the presence of God reappeared and took all my humanity, and it just unraveled like a bowl of spaghetti. There was no more guilt, no more low self-esteem. There was nothing but the presence of the divine that filled me in every way. And I was so happy again because he had returned. And so when I went home and it was kind of late and Mary was folding laundry on the bed, and she looked over at me, she goes, "You're glowing." And I said, "What, you mean I look happy?" Because, I was. And, "No, you're glowing. You're actually glowing." And I just didn't think much of it. It wasn't I didn't even think anything of it. I didn't even think, of course I'm glowing. But anyways, and so that lasted for about 6 months, until one night in the church, one of the deacons came up to me and he said, he was one of the guys that for some reason he never really liked me, but he said, "I think you're doing really, really well spiritually." Now, I know what he meant by that. And from my experience in the last 6 months, I had not had any thought that didn't originate from that divine love. So there was no egoic thought process at all. But I looked at him, and then I looked back over, and I saw Pete and Julie Boomgard. Remember them?
Yeah.
They had just gotten baptized. And by the way, Pete was the only one that did what I did and had an experience. Back in those days, he had a very incredible experience because he did the same thing. And I never asked him to. He just heard me talk about it. So I looked back at this guy and I thought, I am doing really well spiritually, according to what the human thinks that is.
Yeah, right.
And right there, this fear ripped through me, and I turned back around and I saw this dark shadow, and it came back over me, and it was gone.
Do you think that that's like the ego or something?
So I think in its purest form, the ego is just consciousness of oneself. It's not a good or bad or right or wrong. It's the human consciousness of oneself. We say it's bad because we don't really understand it,
Yeah.
but and we can call it whatever we want. But egoic thoughts are thoughts that originate from mind, about mind, and don't take divine into consideration. That's what I think ego is.
Yeah.
It's just one's thoughts about oneself without considering the presence of the divine.
Well, that's well said.